They found this path an hour earlier. One more witness should be added to the portrait I have sketched of the ascetics of Aiud, that of someone who, at that time, regarded them with reserve if not hostility. I have already mentioned that after 1941, the legionnaires who were not quite won over by the movement's spiritual aspects did not give much credit to the ascetics. One of those who adopted a resolute position, interpreting their humility as weakness and a departure from the combative stance of the legionnaires, was Vasile Turturianu. Arrested during Antonescu's time for his activities in the Brotherhood of the Cross, he spent his entire youth, from the age of 19 until 42, in prison. Of an intransigent nature, forever bearing witness to his legionnaire stance and indifferent to consequences, he passed through his long period of imprisonment without compromise. Although at the time he disagreed with Triffon's group, they seemed to me too mild, too soft. The sufferings that divine providence laid before him brought him to the point of being of one mind with those who even now serve as models for me. Although he only had a tangential connection to Valeriu's group, a very condensed account of the adventures of Turturianu, difficult to cover in a single book, impossible in a few pages, will prove interesting. Apart from sincerity and courage with which he bore the cross of his faith, the authenticity of Christian thought resonates in his testimony, facts which even the most ardent of legionnaires cannot deny if he were honest. The statements of Turturianu, stemming from sentiment rather than reason, confirm the fact that legionnarism was a spiritual state of being more than anything else. Any sincere reader cannot help but notice the connection between the legionnaire creed and the spiritual experiences that this tormented soul finally achieved. Of course, this happened with many others, at different times. I am not worthy to thank God for giving me this suffering. For me, prison was a font of gold in which I received, to a great degree, the gift of love toward God and country. There, undergoing those terrible trials, I came to know God and to feel His intercession. When there was no longer any humanly possible way to escape, He seemingly put His hand on my head and moved me from here to the beyond. I have this great joy. God helped me, and I never compromised. I endured prison with love. During my trial, I smiled when they sentenced me to 25 years. My soul accepted this condemnation with joy. Look at that hoodlum, they said. He got such a heavy sentence and he's smiling. Knowing that I was legally innocent, I accepted even the most difficult trials with the sense that this was the will of God. I never despaired. I considered that I was suffering for my own sins and for the sins of my people, and that perhaps God had ordained prison for me as a path of salvation. I was arrested as the result of a betrayal for activity in the Brotherhood. I want to emphasize something. I never acted according to reason. I did what I felt. What I did because that's how it came to be. When Antonescu was handing out long prison sentences for singing a song or reading a legionnaire book, when everyone was running away or hiding, I assumed leadership of the Brotherhood in the Suceava region. Why? Because that's what felt right. That's how I understood the Brotherhood of the Cross, as being a brotherhood until death, gathered around the cross, of all those who felt the spark of love for God and country in their souls. Of all those who felt the spark of love for God and country in their souls. Among those things that led me to follow this path of sacrifice were the words of Corneliu Zilia Codreanu, Christ is risen. In like manner, the righteousness of the Romanian people will also arise. But in order to achieve this, its best sons must willingly accept crowns of thorns, must take the cross upon their shoulders, must ascend Golgotha on their knees and, with tears in their eyes, let themselves be crucified. Legionnaires, may you be these children. These words, ending with legionnaires, may you be these children, made me say, Lord, make me worthy to be one of these children. And truly, God gave me suffering, God gave me everything. He filled my soul with joy in difficult moments and fills it even now. I was indeed one of the children that confessed the Legionnaire Creed. Even in the most difficult situations, I always stated openly that I was a Legionnaire, regardless of the consequences. I didn't even think about the consequences. A sorting was done in prison. Those who had renounced the movement were on one side, while those who had remained faithful were on the other. Without a moment's hesitation, without caring about the consequences, I joined the ranks of those who had remained faithful to the Legionnaires. In prison, I was again put on trial and sentenced to 20 more years for legionnaire activities while in prison, for holding meetings, for singing and such. Considered a fanatic, I was brought to the mental hospital, drugged, chained, isolated, to say nothing of the hunger and cold, for openly affirming legionnairism, but I never compromised. I have nothing to hide. Today I maintain the same position, openly declaring myself to be a legionnaire. After 1989, they called me to witness at the Memorialu Durerii, the Memorial of Pain. I said to them, "Do you realize that if I come, the first thing I will say is that I am a legionnaire?" After which the whole thing fell apart. "Oh no, not that, not that. You don't need to say that. Then I won't participate. That's not my way. I won't do anything halfway." In the 50s, in the coal mines at Baia Sprea, I had an accident. The ceiling caved on top of me. 2 stone slabs propped themselves up, one against the other, and I found myself in the space underneath them. That's how my life was saved. It was a miracle, one of the many miracles that God worked with me. But there were smaller rocks that had fallen on top of me. I had a cracked spine and a few broken ribs. I was in a cast for 7 months. It was a difficult time. I was in a lot of pain and was unable to move. I was alone, with no one to talk to, only a sour and morose common law prisoner who brought me food. It was difficult for me to eat. I couldn't lift my hands to my mouth. I stretched out, took my plate, lifted it up to my mouth, and, from a distance, I poured what was in the spoon into my mouth. That was my life for 7 months. Prayer was my only support. God gives you one kind of suffering in order to deliver you from another. The accident at the mine got me out of re-education in Pitești. Those at Pitești, who knew of me, asked about me, but I couldn't be triaged there because I was in a cast. I had an angel that watched over me. While in prison, I was not slovenly or careless. I was always attending to my spiritual improvement. I sought to bring about the new man within me, the man who would be a genuine legionnaire, the new man who lives his life for Christ. The legionnaire man, as I understood it, is born of pain and sacrifice and shines ever brighter, scalded with the tears of repentance, confession, and Holy Communion. He has sincere love for his neighbor and unlimited faith in the victory and resurrection of the Romanian people, guided by the light of the holy teachings of the meek Jesus. The elite legionnaire is a hero with the soul of a saint. He struggles with faith, sacrifices out of love, and serenely accepts death's torments in the hope of resurrection. All my life I sought to be ever more sincere with myself. My prayer would be, "Lord, help me to do thy will in order to be worthy of thy love." I prayed for the dead a great deal. I prayed for one, and then I would remember to pray for another whose voice I seemed to hear saying, "Pray for me too." I also prayed for him. I was set free after 22 years, 2 months, and 2 weeks. When I arrived home, it was a tragedy. My mother cried, she caressed me, she kissed me, and cried, "Where is the other one? You came back, but where is the other one?" I had a brother who died at Pitești in re-education camp. They tell of a young man who, around the time of Pascha, was crucified and martyred because he didn't want to renounce Christ and blaspheme. I later discovered that it was my brother. For me, the Legionnaire movement was everything. It filled my soul completely. Before I was arrested, a few of us decided to stand guard at the grave of a brother of the cross who had been shot during the time of King Carol II. It was summertime and there were a lot of mosquitoes. I was so captivated by this Legionnaire movement that, in this cemetery full of mosquitoes, as long as I stood guard, I didn't move. I was standing guard at the grave of a Legionnaire, so whether the mosquitoes bit me or not, I didn't move. I was receiving dues from the other brothers of the cross. My aunt once asked me to give her small change from that money to exchange. I had been told that this was the Legion's money, not mine, and that I cannot touch it. "Aunt," I said to her, "it's not my money. I can't touch it. Folded, torn, however it may be, that's the way I got it, and that's the way I'll pass it on." She marveled at my fanaticism. During my first years in Aiud, I got to know Trifon's group. At that time, it seemed to me that their style, so mild, so soft, was not the true Legionnaire line. They sometimes had a sectarian tint of isolation. Later on, they weaned themselves from this, but until they found their balance, it could be said that they were guilty of exaggeration. They didn't exercise good judgment in the beginning. They had too many varied concerns and were extremist. Ioan Ionelide and Virgil Maxim write of essential, mature legionnaire attitudes after things had been sorted out properly. But they went through much turmoil before they were cleansed. Their final attitudes were gained through their toils. They had good intentions. They were sincere and God granted them grace. Their luck lay in the fact that God allowed them to remain near each other when they were shifted around in prison. In fact, they were almost always together. Because of this, they were able to help each other. They shared the suffering and supported each other. However, tensions also appeared. It was difficult for 8 men to inhabit a cell built for 2. They rubbed against each other too much. They no longer had privacy. It was very difficult. There were different personalities among them. In time, things leveled out. They arrived at a common denominator. Tryphon and Father Arseny were born leaders. Tryphon was the oldest, a mature man who was respected at Aiud. Father Arseny, as I saw him, was a determined, intransigent Macedonian. Suffering changed him. Maxim was cerebral and of a combative nature, but around the others he calmed down. He followed the others. Mazare was more rational. He did not have the native inclination toward mystical things as did Gafencu. Structurally, Nidim was closest to Valeriu. Shy as a girl, obedient, markedly pure of spirit. Gafencu burned with a spiritual yearning. Like many Bessarabians, he had something special. He was close to the Slavic spirit, with much affection and warmth. Having in his soul this Slavic component, it may have been easier for him. He had something that predisposed him toward mystical things. It was more difficult for the others, even those in his group. I did not believe that Gafencu, as I knew him in around 1943, would reach such spiritual heights. Although we were the same age, I considered him a child. I did not consider him to be a combative legionnaire who would confront anything for the sake of this ideal. In the beginning, he also didn't see things clearly and he went off in many different directions. It was only with difficulty that he earned the grace that was later showered upon him. Naturally, his troubling concerns encountered the others' worries. By living together and helping each other, things worked out in the end. I was forced to come to some conclusions on my own. I was harsh towards others' mistakes, during my time of freedom as well as in the first years of imprisonment. Suffering made me sense the presence of God and become very forgiving. Before, I was intransigent. I spent most of my time in isolation. I did not understand those in Tryphon's group at the beginning, but in the end, I had to admit they were right. Now, they are role models for me. The greatest joy for me was when I fell on my knees and cried for my sins. I came to understand that the greatest satisfaction a Christian can have is to be able to shed a tear. Tryphon's group discovered this path 1 hour before the others. The others had a hostile attitude toward them, but later they came to think the way they did. Now I have arrived at the threshold of death. I ask God in prayer, grant me, O Lord, tears of longing for heaven. Allow me, O Lord, to have the joy of tears shed for the forgiveness of sins. Lord, grant that the lamp of love and forgiveness for others may always be lit. Amen.